It's sort of unimaginable to me that we can actually be making progress on all of those plans at the same time. So I don't know what prioritization is being done and who's making the choices. So when this came up, it just folded in my mind into the same sort of discussion. And BDC, whether it's this or other areas, other plans. For example, you don't have main streets anymore, I think, but Main Street's yet another sort of geographic, thing. Housing has impact investment areas. So I just thought it would be useful for you to come, just tell us sort of what this is about. Maybe we'll find out, or I'll find out, that this doesn't fit into the whole rubric that I just described. But nonetheless, it seemed worth having you come and talk about it. So thank you for being here. And the other thing I'll say is one of the things I think we're very committed to here is making sure that the Planning Commission and the Planning Department are really viewed as part of the city's economic development enterprise. We obviously have a very specific and unique regulatory function. And if you were here, weeks ago, you would have heard me say that we're not here to greenlight every idea that comes through the door. There's quality control, there's process, there's law, there's regulation, there's certainly community engagement and community involvement. So all of those things really matter. But I want us to feel like we're part of helping the city grow and do economic development. So I'm actually hoping for a closer relationship between planning and BDC, not just planning and BDC, but all these agencies and entities. So this is a good way to kind of also start that connection. So please go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Just real quickly, Ira Cowler, Baltimore Development Corporation. I am our managing director for neighborhood development and capital projects. I also, just real briefly before getting started, want to highlight a few staff members as well, specifically Connor Green, who is here in person, one of our economic development specialists who's worked very closely on this project, as well as Gabrielle Linder, our senior GIS analyst, who is sick, but I believe watching virtually, hopefully. So yeah, appreciate the introduction, and I think just to kind of provide a little bit of context, we view the CDA initiative and the outgrowths from it as being very much in line with all of those other overlapping plans, overlapping opportunities that we've discussed. I do think kind of the piece I'll put on this is we are looking, and the way we talk about this both with our team and with partners is this is not a community development planning exercise. What this is very specifically is a commercial corridor, commercial property and utilization planning exercise, right? And we'll get into part of the reason why that has been an interesting challenge for us, because it doesn't neatly overlap with neighborhoods, with census tracts, with all those other things, right? But really what we are trying to do is create a structure whereby we can really understand from a data-driven perspective what's happening in our commercial corridors and what are the right interventions that all of us as city agencies, as stakeholders, as others need to take on in those districts. So real briefly, I won't read through all the slides, but they're here, they're in your packet to dig into as well later, and hoping that we can have a robust Q&A at the end here. But real briefly, the CDA initiative, Commercial District Assessment Initiative, our goal here is to take a data-driven framework where we use both third-party data, available public data, available BDC data, available planning data, available Open Baltimore data, and combine that with on-the-ground surveying, on-the-ground both verification of that existing data as well as on-the-ground verification of data points that are maybe a little harder to collect from not on the ground, and do that work with our partners who are on the ground, our Main Streets, our CDCs, our other folks kind of closest to those commercial districts in partnership with BDC. And again, by kind of understanding those factors that impact the strength of our corridors, we can better shape future programming decisions, future policy decisions, future CIP funding requests, so on and so forth. I just put two quick quotations, that have been relevant for us in kind of thinking through this project. One from Mayor Brandon Scott, one from Governor Wes Moore. I won't read these out loud, but you can take a look, kind of again, the focus on a block by block approach, and I think critically for us, the focus on a really data-driven approach and consistent data gathering exercise to really make those compelling public policy cases moving forward in our districts. All right, so I just wanted to quickly highlight a few of kind of the challenges that led us to this initiative and led us to this proposed solution here. So one of the biggest challenges that we have when it comes to economic development data, when it comes to our commercial corridors and commercial districts, is that our commercial district boundaries don't really align with any of those traditional data boundaries, right? They don't align with census tracts, they don't align with BINIA neighborhood profiles, they don't align with other stuff, and a lot of them are very micro, right? So even publicly available census data that tries to kind of aggregate and get closer, you're oftentimes finding like, hey, hold on, that doesn't feel right with what we kind of know on the ground here. So that's been one big challenge that we've kind of struggled with when trying to come up with some data-driven approaches in our commercial districts. Again, kind of even that existing data we find often can be unreliable or can maybe not feel true to what's on the ground in the district. You get a business analyst report of, number of existing businesses within a corridor or business revenue within a corridor, and you can kind of quite easily verify like that doesn't actually feel right to what we know is actually happening on the ground in this district. One of the other big challenges that we have is we have a lot of local partners who are doing great on-the-ground surveying work already, right? And I want to kind of highlight that, right? Our Main Street partners are going out, they're collecting information on other businesses. Our bids are going out, they're collecting information on all of our businesses, all of our properties. So we're not necessarily asking folks to do something new. What we're trying to do is standardize that collection so that we can actually use data to make meaningful conclusions across our districts, right? When one person is counting vacant commercial properties with one set of metrics and one set of way of doing that, and another district is doing it in a totally different way, it's really tough for us to kind of make citywide conclusions on determinants of health, determinants of commercial impacts. And then the last challenge I'll just point out, and this map kind of points out, obviously we're a big city. We've got a lot of commercial districts, a lot of commercial corridors with very diverse experiences, very diverse clients, very diverse levels of quote unquote performance. This map is our initial map of commercial districts, commercial corridors within the city. I believe this is over 80, I want to say, kind of like uniquely identified commercial corridors to work with and work through in the city here.
Do you have a criteria, you're talking about all these different criteria, do you have criteria for defining what's a commercial corridor?
Yeah, so I'd love to get into that. So this map represents from an internal BDC strategy and research analytics perspective, looking at commercial zoning and kind of concentrations of commercial zoning, what our initial impressions of commercial district boundaries are. As we'll get into in a little bit, as we've kind of kicked off the initiative itself, one of the key steps is working with that on-the-ground partner and confirming those boundaries, expanding, reducing them based on kind of actual on-the-ground uses and on-the-ground proposed future uses. But this is mostly kind of a zoning exercise for the most part. There we go. All right, so too many words for a slide here, but just again to kind of outline the approach and kind of the way we propose to address some of those challenges I outlined before. A data-driven on-the-ground approach to measuring strengths and needs of commercial districts, working very closely with partner organizations to actually collect those on-the-ground data points. And most of that is done, as you'll see in a little bit here, through two unique bespoke surveys that we created to kind of partner with that third-party data collection. And those are our real estate survey and our windshield survey. The real estate survey is a parcel-by-parcel survey tool. The windshield survey is a block face by block face survey tool. And again, by consistently collecting that data across districts, we're able to start making conclusions, start making regression analysis, so on and so forth, not just on the district level, but on the city level as a whole as well. So again, just to briefly summarize, data-driven approach to answering our big questions, right? We might know a district has vacancy challenges or has a, not the right business mix, but we really need to have the data points to prove that to funders, to prove that to city agencies, state agencies, federal agencies. And where that data is not there, we need to be on the ground gathering those data points in order to properly say that. So again, that combination of third-party data collection and on-the-ground data, what I'll call here data creation. Scale and consistency, so again, collecting those data points in a consistent, common way across our districts, working with our partners, but giving them the tools so that we can all do this in a collaborative and consistent way. And again, using that to come up with both district-specific interventions and strategies, but also a citywide understanding of what are the factors that contribute to our most healthy districts, our most vibrant districts, and how can we bring those to other districts. All right, so to get into the brass tacks here, so this is a program that internally we have been working on for about a year and a half here now. So I believe it was actually introduced to your reference, Mr. Laria, around many different plans. So this was actually introduced, I believe, as part of our Baltimore Together Summit, not in 2024, but in 2023 actually was when this was first released. We spent about a year kind of doing the pilot generation internally, developing surveys, field testing them on the ground as BDC staff, and in the fall released an application round for our first set of community partners to participate in this first round of public CDA assessments and commercial district profile publications. So those partners were selected this winter, I believe in about February. They were notified. We will go over the partners in a slide here in a second. But we met individually with each of those partners, again, confirmed those district boundaries, confirmed kind of an understanding of what the partner expectations are, what BDC's expectations are in the process, and then conducted a field training with all of the partners together, walking through the surveys, walking through process, and refining it based on input from those partners. We are now in the data collection portion, so all of the partners who you'll see in a second are out in the field with BDC staff, with other stakeholder partners in their communities, collecting this survey data right now. It's going directly into our GIS portals, being combined with some of those other third-party data sets we'll get to in a second, for the development here, as you see in the late summer, of our first round of community profiles, or district profiles, excuse me. So these are narrative displays of data. Just to be clear here, kind of this first phase is more about presentation and narrative of data. It's less about drawing those hard conclusions from the data, because we need the on-the-ground data before we can start making those conclusions. So it's really an opportunity for districts to present themselves, present that data. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is that some of the skills we have to offer at BDC, specifically around data collection and data presentation, both from a software standpoint and from a skills standpoint, are things that a lot of our district partners don't have readily available. It's kind of a value add that we can offer as part of this process. And then once we get through this summer, the goal is obviously a second phase, right? This is only 11 out of those 80 districts we identified, right? So the hope is to continue going and also to start using that data, digging into it, creating potentially district typologies, and kind of creating those, I think, both obvious and surprising kind of conclusions around what impacts district health, what are the kind of key target focuses that we can create in specific districts. All right, and now the big one. So here's our list of community partners for this first round. I'll leave this up here for a moment so you can read through at your leisure. I'll just point out it's a really good mix from my perspective of both geography throughout the city, but also a really good mix in terms of organization types, right? So as you see here, we have some main streets, we have some bids, we have some CDOs, CDCs, and we have some other stakeholders as well. So, I think part of one of the big questions we have coming into this process is we know, let's call it kind of district operations, district organization, district capacity is going to be a really important part of district health. And so being able to engage lots of different partners with lots of different organizational structures, funding structures, I think helps us really start dig into that question right from the jump here. I'm going to keep moving, but I'm happy to jump back to this slide as we get into Q&A. All right, so again, how are we collecting this data? I mentioned the surveys. We'll get to that more in depth. The other kind of key part of this work here is generating bespoke district boundaries and bespoke walk sheds for each of those districts. So you see a sample here of, this is Greektown here. Again, we finalized those district boundaries, which are not community boundaries. They are specifically the commercial corridor itself. We then generate 15-minute walk sheds for that data. That's where we're pulling our demographic and for the most part kind of client customer data from for the district. And then the district boundary, that smaller area, is where we are doing the actual surveying work itself.
What do you mean by business information? Is that descriptive or?
Yeah, so if I jump to the next slide here, I think business information is a few things. One, it is aggregated business data, right? So sources like Business Analyst and others on kind of theoretical business performance within that area. But it is also that parcel by parcel real estate survey, identifying what's actually going on at each parcel. What is that business? We are not at this point, to be clear, doing a business side survey, just because I think we, from our kind of best practices research, are not convinced that we're going to get good, reliable data from that quite yet. But I do think that's something we might explore in a future round here. Excuse me. So again, here you see some of the non-survey kind of, I think I've called them third-party data sources in the past, but here's kind of some of the data sources that we are pulling from. Obviously, some of these we all have available to us. Others we pay as BDC subscriptions for access to. And I will also point out that kind of this has been an iterative process as we work with partners, as we start kind of looking at what we have and what we don't have. We're constantly adding and subtracting from this list. I think I had a discussion with our data team yesterday where he was like, we've already got like 60 data points here. What you want to keep adding more? And I think what our goal is to kind of keep adding, subtracting until we find the most impactful ones here and really are able to run meaningful regressions and understand those meaningful impacts.
These days, is it in the mayor's office? I just really can't remember.
Yep. So Main Streets is in the mayor's office of, I will get the acronym wrong, but SMBAD, or whatever it is. Yes, Main Streets is in the mayor's office nowadays. Small and minority business and development.
They don't. I'm sorry, I'm trying to say.
Yes, of course.
They don't just do Main Streets. They have a portfolio which includes Main Streets. Is that
Correct. So that office also does SourceLink and the small business support as well. We work closely with them on everything, including.
And is that Paul Taylor still?
Paul Taylor has
He's retired.
Paul Taylor has
Retired.
retired. Yes.
Oh, so who is running that operation now?
Yeah, the head of SMBAD is Chris Lundy, who was the head of the MBE compliance. So they merged small business and compliance together, and then the head of Main Streets is Charlene Nader.
Charlene Nader, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, of course. And as you noted in the list before, we have, I believe, 3 Main Streets as part of this initial pilot. We also meet regularly with the Main Streets office to talk about this project, talk about how it impacts Main Street funding. And
I guess I was asking sort of in a way because I didn't see Main Streets up there as a data source.
Sure.
So did that get covered? Is that integrated into this?
They certainly are part of what we're talking about. Again, I think to that point of like everyone's going out doing a lot of surveying as well. Part of the Main Street requirement is actually that you are maintaining a database of businesses and properties. So part of what we're working on is aligning what they are required to collect anyway with some of our surveys so that, again, you only have to go out once for all of the information that you actually need to collect on an annual basis. So again, I mentioned 2 kind of on-the-ground surveys. Both of these are app-enabled surveys. So folks go out, as you saw in the photo earlier, with a phone, a tablet. As long as you're connected to the internet, you log into the app, and you can submit these surveys. The windshield survey is a kind of public right-of-way conditions survey, right? So both factual questions, is there a crosswalk here? What's going on, as well as condition questions, right? What is the condition of the sidewalk? What is the condition of litter? What is the foot traffic appear to be, right? With very structured kind of 1, 2, 3 scoring rubrics for all those questions. So that's the windshield survey, and again, the real estate survey is on a parcel by parcel basis. What specifically is going on this parcel? Is it occupied? What is the business? What is the condition of the property? Et cetera, et cetera. And then that obviously, again, overlaps with SDAT, overlaps with our internal database of FIGs, of prior investments, et cetera. All right, just keep rolling along. Here's some sample photos of the apps. I'm happy to share in more detail the full list of questions here. This I realize is probably not very legible, but happy to follow up and answer any more questions about kind of some of the questions that we are asking as part of these surveys.
Ira, did you say this was all developed with a consultancy or in-house or a combination?
All developed internally. Yep.
Internally.
So again, I mentioned Gabrielle before, our GIS analyst, instrumental in both developing these surveys, troubleshooting them as well. We have kind of regular check-ins with our current current partners to make sure that the surveys are working, make sure that when they think they submitted something, we actually got it in on our end, and things have been going relatively smoothly to date. So, great. So again, I'll stop here. I'll just kind of point out we are still very much in the data collection stage here. The next stage, obviously, is what do we do with that data? And I think part of that is going to be about our own internal analysis, kind of, again, finding both those obvious and maybe not so obvious impacts on those key determinants of district health. But I also think the hope is that we are identifying and being able to speak from a more data-driven perspective to advocate for funding, advocate for investment in those obvious low-hanging fruits in a district, right? If we see a district, for example, this has been one of our go-to examples lately, we see a district where our scores on trash on the windshield survey and kind of litter are much lower than every other district. And we also look at 311 or DOT collection, or I'm sorry, DPW collection data, and we see that, wow, there's less collection here, there's less street cans here. Those are the kind of obvious, obvious interventions that we can kind of make right away. The bigger questions around like, hey, what's the right density for this district? What's the right commercial tenure for this district? Those are the things that kind of come later here, I think, as we get to dive into the data. So I appreciate you all. I know I tend to babble here, so happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Horn?
Just a couple questions. What's the sort of best practice on the frequency of these assessments?
Yeah, it's a great question. What we've asked the partners to commit to for right now is to complete at least one survey for each of the agreed upon block faces and for each of the agreed upon parcels. I think because this is a new thing, we've tried to keep each survey to about like 15 to 20 minutes per survey submission. That's pretty manageable, I think, on a one-time thing. We'd like to get this to kind of annual updates and so on, but I think we want to also get that buy-in from the partners before we get folks to truly commit to that. I want to show the value first.
Do you guys also do focus groups or just or conversations as well to elicit more?
Yeah, so part of the commitment from the partners for this first round is that they not only do the work, but they also commit to working as a cohort here to kind of get feedback, kind of refine and develop the process here, and refine and develop the tools, right? So we have, for example, the district profile I spoke to. We obviously have a draft format of that. That's something that we are developing, though, in partnership with those districts. What do you actually need? What's the most valuable information to show for your district, and how can we do that in tandem?
And my last question is, when I looked at the partners, I didn't see BINIA, and so I didn't know if there was any partnership with BINIA, and I didn't see like any university partners, and I didn't know, particularly Coppin, because I saw North Avenue was one of the partners. So I didn't know if they have a whole school of business and stuff like that, so I didn't know if you were trying to use some of their capacity to help you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We have had discussions with BINIA about this project and about data access from them. Certainly, we're open to more and more partners. I think to speak candidly from my perspective, we know we're not at like the full universe. We could spend forever talking about the full universe of data here. We wanted to start getting out there and collecting data and and collecting that on the ground work as well, right? So we certainly would love to continue talking to other partners and other folks about available data and partnerships.
Yeah, Ira, I haven't talked to you about this, but we, the planning department, is doing a joint corridor study with the county planning
Yes.
department on Liberty Road and Belair Road. I mean, your map really illustrates these are streetcar-based commercial corridors. So we know already we're at a disadvantage with parcel size in the modern retail. What, have you found any other either assets or liabilities that city commercial areas have that the county does or does not?
Yeah, I think I'll say, I don't know if this directly answers your question, but it prompts for me. One of the things we've talked a lot about is all of these districts are very different, both in terms of design and what that means for your customer base, right? So we have certain districts that are very local districts, right? Their kind of customer base is going to be that 15-minute walk shed. And then we have other districts, York Road, Harford Road, that are far more vehicular focused, can draw potentially from a larger audience of folks, right? And so part of what we're kind of exploring as we're doing the data gathering here also is, how do we look at those districts in different ways potentially, right? So when we're collecting square footage data on commercial space, there's probably a different right answer for like what the median square footage on Harford Road at the county line is, for example, versus, I don't know, Federal Hill or something like that, right?
Other question? Ira, first of all, this is really very interesting, and thank you for coming and talking to us about it. I guess I have a couple of questions. You've alluded to it a little bit, and maybe you don't exactly know what the answer is yet, but what are the potential next steps? You sort of talked a little bit about sharing, information, but can you give us at least your hypothesis of what kinds of concrete things might come out of this when you start to get past the collection stage?
Yeah, and I'll speak specifically from the BDC side because I don't want to speak to other people's funding and priorities necessarily, right? But I think to just be transparent for a minute, we have a lot of approaches that are kind of like citywide, one-size-fits-all approaches, right? And there's great value in that, right? Our facade grant is a citywide program. It will always be a citywide program. That being said, there's districts where one more facade grant is going to have a great deal of impact and a great deal of transformative impact. There's other districts where there's another type of intervention that might have a greater impact, right? And so part of what we want to, and part of the reason we're taking on the ground data and combining it not just with third-party data, but combining it with our internal data sets of where have we done those investments, where have other agencies done those investments, is kind of really understanding what are those interventions that are going to be impactful. If we get into a district, I'll just give one example of something I've been thinking about. We go to a district, we see, hey, there's this vacant property or unoccupied property. And guess what? The two adjoining blocks around that are scoring standard deviations below everywhere else on building condition. We know, hey, this one property is not just impacting this property, it's impacting the performance of all these other properties as well, right? So a targeted investment there by all of us together, partners, is going to have a much greater impact than, again, doing one fig a block down potentially or something like that.
Can you go back to your list of partners, the grid?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. No, it's this way. There we go.
So what's the working theory about who would then take the lead on the implementation? So BDC is the unifying entity here because it's your program. These entities that are on the list range from large to small, very sophisticated to perhaps the less sophisticated. You have a council member, for example, which is a whole different kind of enterprise. So, is You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how does that work? Does BDC stay involved? Do you foresee a BDC sort of initiative that then helps to implement this? Or is it sort of like you're gonna hand the ball back to some of these organizations whose job it is to do these very things? You're bringing them great resources. You're sort of a kind of a force multiplier. I get all that, but are you going to say, all right, great, we figured it out, Federal Hill Main Street, I'm going to give you some additional resources that seem to be relevant because of your analysis. We'll check back in with you in 5 months. What's the paradigm?
Well, yeah, I think, first of all, to be clear, we have always worked in partnership with all of our on-the-ground partners, right? All of our on-the-ground organizations, and that is not changing here, right? I think what this is, from my perspective, is providing a framework to both enhance those relationships, but also a framework where we can figure out who needs to carry water for what, right? So certainly there are some interventions that are probably going to be led by BDC, right? There's going to be other things that are going to be led by either nonprofits. There are some things that are going to be led by the property owners themselves, right? We're going to identify, again, a target impactful property. We're going to go out, we're going to engage that property owner. We're going to figure out what we all need to do to transition that property into a productive use, right? So I think the goal of the initiative really is to provide a framework both where on a citywide level, we all as policymakers can talk about commercial district health in the same way that the housing typology lets us talk about, neighborhood health. And on a district level, we all can be using the same language and using the same kind of next steps together, right? That we've all identified. These are the critical impacts that we all need to be working towards when you as a nonprofit are exploring your Bernie request for next year, and we are figuring out our CIP opportunities for next year.
Thanks. I guess I'll ask you this question, and maybe the planning director or others, if they have views. I'm trying, and it goes back to my earlier, bigger point. I mean, we're a big city, right? We're not the biggest city. I mean, how big are we? And how much localization is appropriate? Like, I don't have the professional experience to figure out what the best practices segmentation is for a city the size of Baltimore. Its geographic size, its population size, its diversity of income, and everything else that makes Baltimore Baltimore. And I guess I'm obviously you can't do this with one big citywide plan, although we have a bunch of those too. But then we have all these little plans and little initiatives that are spread out across the landscape, some of which overlap with other plans for the same areas and all the things I said earlier. Like, how many plans is too many plans? And I guess I worry, and we're starting to talk about this here, and you may not be aware, but if you literally like stacked up all the plans that exist across the entire city government, nonprofit partners, and everything else, and then particularly if you had the capacity to start flipping pages and saying, how many of the things in any or all of these plans have actually been implemented? I just worry that our batting average isn't what you want it to be. And I don't know what the solution, first of all, maybe I'm wrong, maybe our batting average is great. But if it's not, I don't know whether that's because we're not doing a good job of implementing a plan, or whether there really are too many overlapping plans. It just becomes sort of like a, sort of background noise. So
Yeah.
Can you help me? And maybe Chris, you can help a little bit. I mean, work through that question.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, I think as it relates to this project, and again, we're kind of still at the start of this, but I don't view this as a planning effort in the way that, like, at the end of this, there's an implementation matrix for every district and we're working through said matrix. What I view this more of is a process. I think there's twofold. One, there's the value add for the partners on the ground of kind of giving them that narrative, giving them that data that they can talk about their district in a more impactful way, and we can be partners in kind of sharing that language together. But I think there's also the piece of, like, from gathering this data throughout these diverse districts, from analyzing this data, we can say, hey, we all presume that, I don't know, X data point has an impact on commercial vacancy. Now we could say with certainty, X data point has an impact on commercial vacancy. So let's figure out what our new policy choices are, what our new investment strategies are, to address that data point, right? To kind of talk to that. And let's keep checking in with these districts to see how we've actually moved the needle on those data points.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. So first, just to make sure everybody's up to speed, like we have two processes for accepting small area plans. We have a city process and a community process. The difference between the two is really the city doesn't make a financial commitment to a community-generated plan. Like the plan could say you're going to rebuild the streetscape in your neighborhood, but we're not going to do that because you said so in a plan. We do have participation standards in the community plan, like how around outreach and a result. One of the unintended consequences here is there's a very inequitable distribution of planning across the city, right? Larger organizations, staffed organizations, it's a pretty powerful organizing tool for a neighborhood, and they use it that way. But you all know better than anyone that we have not been able to tie capital investments to planning efforts for a decade because of the shape of the CIP. So now that we're coming back to a place where the CIP is more rigorous, I think we need to figure out as a commission and as a department what's the nexus between the CIP and particularly our community planning efforts. There was a model probably about 20 years ago when the CIP was more robust, where the city created coalitions of communities in areas of the city because for whatever reason it needed to do a planning effort, and that involved major capital commitments. Maybe that's a return to that. I don't know, Doug, if you remember that. But I think it was before. I think it was in the early aughts.
Were those, just from my own recollection, were those coalitions, they have names or they?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It was started with an S or something.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
So I think that the team, Sarah, is working with the community planning teams to develop options to bring to this group and others, but we'd certainly welcome your input. It is a little bit crazy. We do hear planning fatigue a lot now. Even in neighborhoods like Park Heights, we hear where there's a lot going on, we hear about planning fatigue. And some of that may be cynicism.
One question I have, and thank you for the presentation. Just look at the list. I mean, obviously, it's heavy in some parts of the city, lighter in others, and obviously my eyes go to Southwest Partnership and the West Side. And it makes me think about the nexus between BDC and also public markets, because I'm thinking about Hollins Market, and you mentioned vacancy before, and I'm thinking about how some markets are more thriving than others and what's driving that. So can you talk a little bit about the interface between public markets? Because I'm also thinking about Avenue Market as well. So, yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So first of all, I'll just point out this round one selection was based on an application process, right? So this wasn't us going out picking our preferred partners or something like that, right? And I will say, I think it points to one of the kind of challenges we will have to overcome here to the planning point earlier. These lifts are much easier where you have an organized entity to do the surveying, to do the work, right? And I think a big part as we advance in this process, a big part is gonna be like, great, we're working with those folks, they're on board. How do we build up those types of organizations in other districts and other areas where we don't have that? Or how do we take challenged entities, right, who need investment, who need support, and provide that technical assistance, provide those resources to do it? To the public markets question specifically, I think public markets is certainly a partner in this process. We've had discussions with them as well. I do think like that's a little different for me than the CDA work, right? It's like, I don't know if this is the right tool. We talk about that a lot, like where is this the right tool and where is it maybe not the right tool, right? Holland's Market is obviously a part of a bigger district that we're looking at, but I think we have to think about how we think about the markets themselves and the market tenants and users within that in a creative way.
Are there other questions? Anything else you want to add, having, anything we haven't touched on or that this has made you sort of think, oh, I should probably make this other point, anything like that?
No, I really, really appreciate the time. This is something that we are championing. This is a BDC initiative, obviously, right? But this is something that is going to require all of us working together to both make sure that the process is successful and that the outcomes are successful. And that, to I think the main point here, we're not repeating each other's work, right? That we're actually working in partnership.
And just so you know, and I've had a little bit of this conversation with the new CEO at BDC, Otis Rowley, who has a lot of experience, including here in this department. I mean, this commission has maybe the most direct responsibility for the planning department, but it has a much broader responsibility. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do, we're going to have a new planning director at some point. We have new BDC head. Just trying to sort of figure out how to all, work together. And I think this commission views itself, at least I know I view it, as having broader scope certainly than the planning department, as a potential sort of silo buster and convener of different agencies doing things. And BDC has, lots of people have, that. And we want to make sure that we don't also have a bunch of silo busters working in silos. That we need to figure out how to make it all work together. So the mayor's office obviously is probably the grandest silo buster of all, and does that. But there's a role for everybody to try and figure out how to work together. So Ira, is there a natural point at which you want to come back and talk to us about your output here?
Sure, yeah, I would say, again, data gathering is being done right now as we speak.
Right.
We will be publishing, and again, these will be both publicly available profiles and publicly available data sets, right? We're not trying to, at least the ones that we can make publicly available will be. We are cautiously hoping to have the first of those profiles ready, I would say, in this public meeting, I'll say September. We'd be more than happy to come back and walk through those profiles and walk through some of our initial findings at that point.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. Okay,
Appreciate that.
we appreciate it. Thank you to your colleagues, out there in virtual. Thank you for not coming if you weren't feeling well.